The sky above Lincolnshire belonged to no one on the morning of March 14th, 1944. Cloud formations stacked themselves against an iron horizon. Wind rattled the aluminum skin of a formation of B-17 flying fortresses as they returned from a bombing run over Augsburg. Squadron call sign, Angel 36. Second Lieutenant James Caldwell sat in the left-hand seat of the lead bomber, designated Gretchen's Ghost. 23 years old, Ohio farm country in his blood. 371 hours of flight time in his logbook. His hands rested steady on the control yoke as the English coastline began to materialize through scattered clouds 8,000 feet below. The mission had gone clean. Flak over the target had been moderate. No fighters intercepted during egress. The formation held tight. Fuel consumption ran nominal. Gretchen's Ghost carried minor damage to the vertical stabilizer, nothing structural. All four Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines hummed their relentless rhythm. Then the number 3 engine coughed. Caldwell's co-pilot, Lieutenant Raymond Archer, glanced at the instrument panel. Oil pressure on number 3 dropped 15 pounds in 3 seconds. Cylinder head temperature spiked. Black smoke began threading from the cowling. "Engine fire, number 3, Archer said. Caldwell's left hand moved to the throttle quadrant. He pulled the number 3 mixture control to idle cutoff. His right hand reached for the feathering button. The propeller blades rotated into alignment with the slipstream, reducing drag. Standard emergency procedure. Textbook response. The fire did not go out. Through the cockpit window, Caldwell could see orange flame licking along the nacelle. Smoke thickened. The aluminum cowling began to buckle. Heat distortion rippled the air behind the engine. "Fire still burning," Archer said. His voice carried the flatness of a man controlling panic. Caldwell pressed the fire extinguisher button. Carbon dioxide discharged into the engine compartment, white vapor mixed with black smoke. For 5 seconds, the flame receded. Then it roared back. The fire spread along the underside of the wing. Fuel lines ran through that section, hydraulic lines, control cables. If the fire reached the wing root, structural failure would follow. The bomber would break apart in mid-air. Caldwell keyed the radio. Angel lead to base. Declaring emergency. Engine fire, number 3. Attempting controlled descent. Request priority landing. Runway 27. The reply came through static. Roger, Angel lead. Runway 27 cleared. Fire crews standing by. Wind 260 at 12 knots. Altimeter 29992. 8,000 feet separated Gretchen's Ghost from the ground. Caldwell began a shallow descent, 300 feet per minute. Too steep and the airflow would fan the flames. Too shallow and the fire would consume the wing before they reached the runway. The bomber shuddered. Wind resistance against the feathered propeller created asymmetric thrust. Caldwell applied right rudder trim to compensate. His left leg pressed hard against the rudder pedal. Muscle burned. He ignored it. 6,000 feet. The fire intensified. Flames crawled toward the fuselage. Caldwell could feel heat through the cockpit bulkhead. The air smelled like burning oil and scorched metal. "We're not gonna make it," Archer said. Caldwell did not answer. His eyes moved between the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, and the windscreen. The runway lay 12 miles ahead. He calculated descent rate against ground speed. The numbers did not favor survival. 4,000 feet. The flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Paul Dietrich, appeared behind the cockpit. His face carried soot streaks. "Sir, the fire's reached the inboard fuel cell. If that tank ruptures—" "I know," Caldwell said. 3,000 feet. The runway came into view, a strip of concrete bordered by grass. Emergency vehicles lined the taxiway, red lights flashing. Caldwell entered the landing pattern. Gear down. Flaps to approach setting. Airspeed 130 knots. The fire now engulfed half the wing, 2,000 feet. Standard approach procedure called for a stabilized descent on final, crossing the threshold at 110 knots, touchdown within the first 1,000 feet of runway. But Gretchen's Ghost carried fire along her wing. Every second in the air increased the probability of catastrophic failure. Caldwell made a decision. He pushed the control yoke forward. The bomber's nose dropped. Airspeed climbed to 150 knots. The descent rate doubled. Archer's hand gripped the edge of the instrument panel. 1,000 feet. The runway threshold rushed toward them. Caldwell pulled back on the yoke. The bomber's nose rose. Airspeed bled off. 500 feet. 400. 300. They crossed the threshold at 140 knots. 40 knots too fast. The main wheels struck concrete. The bomber bounced. Caldwell shoved the yoke forward. The wheels slammed down again. Rubber screamed. The landing gear struts compressed to their limit, and Gretchen's Ghost began to roll. Standard landing procedure called for gradual braking. Apply pressure, release, apply again. Smooth deceleration prevented brake overheating and tire blowout. But the runway at RAF Deenathorpe measured 6,200 feet. At 140 knots, Gretchen's Ghost would consume that distance in 23 seconds. Caldwell pressed both brake pedals to the floor. The tires howled. Smoke poured from the wheel wells. The bomber decelerated hard. G-forces threw the crew forward against their restraints. Metal groaned. The airframe shuddered, and the brakes locked. Both main tires skidded. Rubber melted against concrete. The bomber began to veer left. Caldwell applied right rudder. The nose gear fought for traction. The aircraft fishtailed. 4,000 feet of runway remained. Then 3,000. Then 2. The fire still burned. Archer shouted something. The words disappeared into the roar of tortured machinery. Caldwell kept both feet jammed against the brake pedals. His leg muscles screamed. His vision tunneled. The end of the runway appeared ahead. Grass, then a drainage ditch, then trees. 1,500 feet. 1,000. 500. Gretchen's Ghost stopped. 270 feet from the end of the runway. Caldwell sat motionless in his seat. His hands remained locked on the control yoke. His breath came in shallow pulls. Behind him, Dietrich was already moving, yanking open the escape hatch. Archer unbuckled and shoved the cockpit door open. "Out! Everybody out!" Archer yelled. The crew bailed through hatches and windows. Fire trucks raced across the tarmac. Foam cannons opened up, drowning the burning wing in white retardant. The fire hissed and died. Caldwell climbed down from the cockpit, his legs nearly buckled. An operations officer approached, clipboard in hand. "Lieutenant, we need your report." Caldwell looked back at Gretchen's Ghost. The bomber sat crippled on the runway, smoke rising from her wheel wells and wing. Her tires had burned through to the cord. Brake fluid pooled on the concrete. "I locked the brakes," Caldwell said. The operations officer frowned. "You what?" "I locked the brakes, held them down, didn't release until we stopped." "That's not procedure." "I know." The operations officer wrote something on his clipboard. "You're lucky the tires didn't blow. You're lucky the gear didn't collapse. You're lucky the whole damn plane didn't ground loop into the grass." Caldwell said nothing. "But you're alive," the officer added. "Or so I suppose it worked." Caldwell nodded. He turned away from the smoking wreckage and walked toward the debriefing hut. His hands still shook. He did not yet understand that his stupid brake trick had just saved 9 lives, or that, within 3 weeks, every bomber pilot in the 8th Air Force would be briefed on what he had done. RAF Deenathorpe, England, home to the 401st Bombardment Group. 64 B-17 flying fortresses, 4 squadrons, 1,800 men. The base sat in the flat farmland of Northamptonshire, a grid of runways and hardstands carved from English soil. It smelled like aviation fuel and wet grass. The bombers returned damaged. They always did. Since January, the 401st had lost 19 aircraft, some to flak, some to fighters, some to mechanical failure. The distinction mattered little to the men who did not return, but to the pilots who did, the distinction mattered greatly. Engine fires ranked among the most feared emergencies. The Wright R1820 Cyclone engine produced 1,200 horsepower at 2,500 RPM. It burned 100-octane fuel at a rate of 70 gallons per hour. When an engine caught fire, the flames fed on fuel lines, oil reservoirs, and hydraulic fluid. Standard procedure called for immediate shutdown, feathering, and fire suppression. In 70% of cases, the fire extinguished. In 30%, it did not. Caldwell sat in the debriefing room with his crew. An intelligence officer asked questions. Caldwell answered in monotone: target identification, flak intensity, fighter encounters. The questions followed a script. Then the intelligence officer asked about the landing. "You locked the brakes," he said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Until we stopped." The officer glanced at his notes. "Standard procedure is intermittent braking. Gradual deceleration. You're aware of this?" "Yes." "Why did you deviate?" Caldwell looked at the table. His hands rested flat against the wood. He could still feel the vibration of the brake pedals through his boots. The fire was spreading. "If the wing failed in the air, we'd all die. If I ground looped on landing, we'd probably survive. If I ran off the end of the runway, same thing. But if I didn't stop the aircraft fast enough, the fire would reach the fuel tanks, so I locked the brakes and held them." The intelligence officer wrote for a long time. Then he looked up. "You risked tire blowout, brake failure, loss of directional control." "Yes." "You got lucky." Caldwell said nothing. The debriefing ended. The crew filed out. Caldwell remained seated. The intelligence officer gathered his papers. "For what it's worth," the officer said, "the ground crew chief told me your brake assemblies melted, both main gear. The drums glowed red. Another 5 seconds and the hydraulic lines would have ruptured." Caldwell nodded. "But you stopped the aircraft." "Yes." The officer left. Caldwell sat alone in the empty room. Outside, engines roared as another formation prepared for departure. The war continued. It always did. 3 days later, Caldwell flew another mission. Schweinfurt, ball-bearing factories, heavy flak. 2 bombers from the 401st went down. Gretchen's Ghost took shrapnel through the tail section. No injuries. The mission logs recorded it as a success. Caldwell did not think about the brake trick. The incident had passed. He assumed it would remain buried in the after-action reports, a footnote in a war that generated 10,000 footnotes every day. He was wrong. On March 22nd, a technical directive arrived from 8th Air Force Headquarters. The subject line read, "Emergency Landing Procedures, Engine Fire with Compromised Wing Structure." The directive had been drafted by Colonel Harlan Stowe, Chief of Flight Operations. It referenced the incident involving B-17G serial number 4338274, callsign Angel Lead, pilot Second Lieutenant J. Caldwell. The directive acknowledged that current emergency procedures emphasized brake modulation to prevent tire failure and loss of control. However, it noted that in cases where wing structural integrity had been compromised by fire, prolonged airborne time increased the risk of catastrophic in-flight breakup. The directive proposed a modification to existing procedure in the event of an engine fire that could not be extinguished, and where wing structural failure appeared imminent, pilots were authorized to execute a high-speed landing with sustained brake application. The technique carried significant risk of tire blowout and ground loop. However, analysis indicated that the risk of remaining airborne exceeded the risk of aggressive ground deceleration. The technique was termed emergency maximum braking. Pilots began calling it the Caldwell stop. Caldwell learned about the directive when his squadron commander summoned him to operations. The commander handed him a mimeographed copy of the technical bulletin. "You're famous," the commander said. Caldwell read the document. His name appeared 3 times. He felt nothing resembling pride. "I got lucky," Caldwell said. "Maybe. But now everyone else gets to use your luck." Caldwell looked up. "Sir, I didn't invent anything. I just held the brakes down because I was scared." The commander smiled. "Most innovations in this war came from someone being scared. The difference is you survived to tell people what you did." Caldwell handed the document back. "Will it work for other pilots?" "We don't know. The engineering section is running tests, but the math looks sound. High kinetic energy, maximum friction, shortest stopping distance. If the wing's about to fail anyway, getting on the ground fast makes sense. And if the tires blow, then you ground loop. But at least you're on the ground when it happens." Caldwell nodded. The logic held. Fear had driven his decision, but the physics supported it. He wondered how many pilots would have the nerve to lock the brakes when every instinct screamed to modulate. Sir, can I ask a question?" "Go ahead. How many planes have we lost to in-flight breakup after engine fires?" The commander's expression darkened. "Since January, 7. 4 went down over Germany. 3 broke apart on approach." "How many men?" 70. Caldwell absorbed the number. 70 men, 10 crews. If even one of those pilots had known to lock the brakes, some might have survived. "Don't do that to yourself," the commander said. "You can't save the ones who already died. You can only help the ones who haven't crashed yet." Caldwell said nothing. "Dismissed, Lieutenant." Caldwell stood and left the office. Outside, the sky had turned grey. Rain fell in thin sheets. He walked across the tarmac toward his quarters. Mechanics worked on a bomber with its engine cowlings open. Tools clanged against metal. Someone shouted about a fuel leak. The war continued. The Air Transport Command testing facility at Wright Field and Ohio existed for one purpose: to determine whether new ideas killed pilots or saved them. Engineers conducted stress tests on airframes, fuel systems, engine components. Test pilots flew experimental aircraft until they broke. Data accumulated in filing cabinets. Some ideas proved worthwhile. Most did not. On April 3, 1944, Wright Field received a request to validate emergency maximum braking procedures for B-17 aircraft. The request originated from 8th Air Force Headquarters. Attached documentation included the after-action report from Lieutenant Caldwell's landing at RAF Deenathorpe. Major Samuel Voss, chief test pilot, read the report twice. Then he walked to the engineering section. "We're testing a panic stop," he told the lead engineer, a civilian named Harold Pritchard. Pritchard looked up from his drafting table. "A what?" "A pilot in England locked his brakes during an emergency landing. Didn't release until the aircraft stopped. Command wants to know if it's repeatable or if he just got lucky." Pritchard removed his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief. "Locking the brakes violates every principle of safe landing technique." "I know. The tires will overheat. The brake drums will warp. The hydraulic lines could rupture." "I know. If one tire blows before the other, the aircraft will veer. At high speed, that's a death sentence." "I know," Voss said, but the pilot had a wing on fire. He decided rolling off the runway beat, breaking apart in the air, and it worked. Pritchard put his glasses back on. How fast was he going at touchdown?" 140 knots. "Good God." He stopped in 6,000 feet, 270 feet of runway to spare. Pritchard sat in silence for a moment. Then he pulled a slide rule from his desk drawer and began calculating. His pencil scratched across paper. Minutes passed. Assuming standard B-17G weight at 60,000 pounds. Landing speed 140 knots. Coefficient of friction 0.8 for locked brakes. Yes, it's possible. Barely. The deceleration would be approximately 3 Gs. Tire temperature would exceed 400 degrees. Brake drum temperature over 600. The margin for error is non-existent, so it's not repeatable. "I didn't say that." Pritchard looked up. "I said the margin for error is non-existent, which means the pilot has to execute perfectly. No hesitation, No second guessing.